Hello, welcome to the latest edition of Global Business Culture India Matters. Those of you who have watched these episodes in the past will know that what we're trying to do here is to do a deeper dive into some interesting issues around Indian business culture and India generally. I've been working with India now since about 1996, so for a very long time. I've been there very, very many times. I run a business which is based in India. And so, to a layman, I probably know India very well, but I'm very aware of the fact that India is almost unknowable. It's so big and it's so broad and it's so vast. And so there's still lots of things that I don't know. And the way that we're running these sessions is that me as a non-Indian, but an interested party is trying to find out a lot more about India than I already know. And to help me investigate a few things in a bit more depth, I always have my two colleagues, Nav and Vidya, with me. So I'm Keith Warburton. I'm the CEO of Global Business Culture. We're a global cultural awareness training organization who specialize on the impact that international cultural differences can have when people work in a cross-border environment. And a very large percentage of the work we do in this area is around the India to the West and the West to India corridor. And I have with me today two of my colleagues, Vidya and Nav, who I'll get to introduce themselves. So I'll just start with Vidya.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. As Keith mentioned, we work together at Global Business Culture. I'm based in Bangalore. Born and raised in India, and for over 20 years now, I've been working with multinational organizations based out of India. And so there's a whole range of experiences that makes it interesting for me to contribute to these live sessions. So looking forward to today's. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vidya. And so we've got me, who's British. We've got Vidya, who's Indian, and we've got Nav, my other colleague, who's kind of has a foot in both camps, don't you, Nav?
Yeah, I think I'm confused.
Yeah,
I'm somewhere in between India and the UK. I've spent half my life in India and half of my life now in the UK, or mostly in the UK. So I grew up in India, studied in India, moved to the UK, been working here in many other countries for the last 20 plus years. So I get to experience both sides, the positives and the negatives. So I really enjoy these sessions to talk about some of these things, which I'm sure a lot of our clients, which a lot of you are probably facing every day. So hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion again.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nav. Thanks, Vidya. So as usual, we've picked three topics to discuss today. The first one is around trust building and how trust is built in India. The second one, which is kind of linked, is around how people from the West who are working with colleagues in India can build relationships when they're working with their colleagues remotely. This is a question we get asked all the time in the seminars and training programs that we run. And the third issue we're going to look at today is how the relationship orientation of India actually directly impacts on management styles in India. And I think this is a really fascinating topic that we'll get to at the end of the session. But we're going to start about this issue of trust building. So as I said, we work in the field of the impact that international cultural differences have when people work cross-border. And one of the key elements of any successful business, whether you're working within your own country or cross-border, is to what extent you can build trust with the people that you're working with, whether they be colleagues or whether they be suppliers. All cultures need to develop trust. But the challenge when you're working globally is that different cultures develop trust in different ways. There is no one way of building trust, and there is no one set of characteristics or behaviors that trust can be universally built by. And so what I want to explore today a little bit is this whole issue of how is trust built in India. And we talk quite a lot about this internally when we're having internal meetings. And I know, Nav, you often talk about the kind of the trust journey that happens within India. And I wondered if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, and for sure. I think this is one of those key differences we see between West and India. In addition to the hierarchical differences that we see in the teams, this I would say is the second biggest factor in how teams relate to each other, how teams get to work together. And I always say it's a journey because I've kind of lived on both sides of the world. I think in India, especially if you think of team or even if you think of clients and suppliers, you do business with people, not with companies, not with roles, not with businesses. So it's really people part. Who do I work with? Do I know you? Can I trust you on an individual level? So it's really emphasis on who you know rather than what you know. And that comes from the fact that in India, in the society, when you first meet someone as your colleagues, as your clients, there's more distrust, I would say. There's more suspicion. Can I trust you? Right. And I think the default state is really one of a distrust, I would call it. And I think then you need to invest time, get to know each other, maybe get other people to refer to you so you can build that friend of a friend is a friend, right? And you build that trust over time to get to a point there where you can say, I can trust you now. We can, what you say, I understand. What you say, I believe in it. I know you will deliver. And I think that journey doesn't stop there. It goes further, and then you can really become friends and really build a long-lasting relationship and trust that goes beyond work. People who are friends for life then, and they will take your word as a contract. I don't need to sign any contracts anymore. So it's that journey you go through. And I think if India, that the journey is this much, in the West, in the business world, the journey is like this. You start with a bit of trust, which is, yes, do I know you're credible to an extent? But then I'm going to build trust based on your credibility, your delivery, the business outcomes. Then yes, I can trust you. But that trust stops at the business level. It does not go into more personal, where to work with each other effectively, we don't have to become friends, right? We can become acquaintances. As colleagues, there's a usually quite clear distinction and boundary between work and personal lives, right? Your colleagues are by default not your friends in the West. Yeah, you can make friends at work, but it's not a prerequisite for people to work effectively with each other. In India, it's almost a prerequisite. I think compared to the West, in India, most of your colleagues are also by default your friends. So I think that is something that is so different across how people relate to colleagues, clients, suppliers, where we see a lot of these business misunderstandings.
And I think that initial distrust that you mentioned there is a bit confusing for a Westerner, because despite the fact that, as you described, there is that initial distrust in the early stages there, you would never feel that as a Westerner, because Indians will still be ultimately friendly, ultimately warm, ultimately welcoming, and you feel like you've cracked it from the first stage because they are like that. But that's masking a kind of deeper seated distrust, isn't it?
Yeah, that is me in India trying to build that relationship. Because one of the ways you build that relationship is by showing that I'm there for you. I'm willing to do things for you. I'm invested in knowing you personally, which comes across quite warm, quite personal, quite friendly from a Western perspective. But I think it really gets tested when you test by asking things, going around the contracts, asking for favors. And I think the Indian teams usually get quite or asking for really personal stuff. And people in the West will say, I'd rather not talk about my personal life. And I think the teams in India go, oh, okay, you're right. So.
And I know that in your past life, when you used to work in corporate in the UK, you've always said that you found it quite strange that you had people who worked with, colleagues who you thought you were friends, and then you'd ask them a favour and they would kind of say, well, I can't do that, I'm too busy.
Yeah, and the tone that you use, because it's business first, right? You ask things in the business setup, can you help me with this task? Or can you take over? I'm going to be busy tomorrow. Can you do this part of the report for me? I think in the West, in the UK or US, in many other countries, I think people will find strange that you're asking them for such a thing, because it's your role, it's not my role. And I think then they also don't hesitate to say, no, sorry, that's not really I can help you with. And I think then you get this surprise from an Indian perspective, thinking, that's quite rude, that's quite direct. I thought we were friends. And I think this is where you start seeing the differences.
Yeah, and Vidya, so now's just described the journey there, but obviously there are certain behaviours and things that people do which will make them worthy of trust or not worthy of trust. So what type of things are people looking for to determine whether somebody is worth my trust or worthy of trust or not?
Right. There's a whole range of things, Keith. I'm going to share some. I think, first of all, what really matters is that interpersonal connect and how that feels to people. I think being a contextual country that India is, a lot is read into the tone, the body language, and how well-meaning or not you might be. So if those interactions come across as being, genuine, warm, and friendly, there's that kind of starts or gets the ball rolling. And then, of course, there's the credibility, like Nav was saying. Can you actually deliver on what you said you would? And all the little things, they go into the picture here, whether that's, going above and beyond, doing the extra hours, whatever it might be, everything does get noticed. So that's how you build credibility, what you bring to the table. But there's also the favor aspect, as Nav was saying. As the trust is being built, people do feel comfortable asking each other for favors. It could be professional, it could be personal. And then when you do actually follow through and come through, then that seals the relationship almost. It just makes people trust more. So it's sort of like an ongoing behavior. It's like making investments into a bank. So the more you keep doing it, the more time you spend informally, the more you get to know each other, share and give personal information, and the small gestures, all of that. It just builds on.
And we were talking about this the other day, and I think that favour giving, from my perspective, is quite important, because what I find is in India is that people are always doing me little favours that I haven't really asked for, but they're doing all of these little favours. I'm talking about people who I work with, really, and then I'm thinking, well, thanks for that, but what about the big picture? You haven't actually delivered what I wanted you to deliver, but you've done all these little favors for me. And I'm kind of quite dismissive, I think. Subconsciously, I don't do it deliberately, it's just subconsciously, because it's not important to me. And when a Westerner like me dismisses those little favors that people are doing for me, how is that received?
It's very disappointing. So people actually take it to heart, and they think, I did this, or I set the conference room up and kept everything organized and had all the stuff ready. I didn't get one word of appreciation. Yeah. So it almost feels like the little things that I do towards making something work is going unnoticed. So we're also, inherently people who like positive reinforcement, feedback, and appreciation. And the journey matters, not just the end goal. So all the steps that went into it also need to be recognized.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting generic cultural point, not just about India, but although I know that consciously, so I know that consciously about the favor giving and that I should respond to it positively and give positive reinforcement, I very often don't. I just forget, and I still, rather than giving positive reinforcement of that, my annoyance at the fact that the bigger thing hasn't been done always wins out of the day. And that's why cultural awareness, it's a conscious activity all the time. You have to consciously be thinking about these things, I think.
And I'm sure, Keith, there are lots of things which you didn't even realize you were ignoring. So, you're picking on the things that you've done, the little gestures. I'm sure there's 100 others which you didn't even register that they were there. And I think this is why it's so difficult to work in.
And I think that on a bigger picture in teams, is connected to another thing we talk a lot about with our clients, which is that in India, people expected to be appreciated for the effort they put in and of itself, regardless of the result. So we might have missed the deadline, but I put a lot of effort into this and I worked late, and therefore I should be rewarded and praised for that. Whereas for me, if we've missed the deadline, everything else, I'm not bothered. It's just, It's not important. And I think you get a big mismatch between teams in the West and teams in India around that issue, I think. And just moving on to the second topic, which is about building relationships across hybrid and remote teams. So in that first piece about trust, we've talked a lot about the importance of personal relationships. And this is something we always talk about with our clients. When we're dealing with clients in the West, we talk about the need to develop personal relationships with your colleagues in India, and they push back quite rightly and quite understandably very often and say, but I meet them maybe 3 times a week for half an hour on a Zoom call. How can I possibly develop a personal relationship with people in that way? And I think that's a legitimate question. And so, Vidya, what would you say in response to that when clients ask about that?
Yeah, the ideal thing that works for India is in-person connection. There's nothing that can actually replace that, as practical or impractical it might be, and we can argue about it. When Western clients do actually come to India, and their only focus at the time is to spend, undivided time with the team in India, be part of their day-to-day, and really bond, it leaves a lasting impression for both sides. And then when people return to wherever they are, everything just flows a lot more easily, and the connection is much more genuine and easy, really. And a lot of things that they experienced as roadblocks, I've personally heard from clients say that all disappeared after their visit to India. So if you ask me, that would be the most effective way.
Yeah, I would always say to my clients that the best thing you can possibly do is go and visit your team in India, not just necessarily for the building of those personal development relationships, although I think that's very important. I think it's also transformational for the Westerners who go to India and see the situation on the ground and meet people face to face, and they can start to understand the dynamics a little bit better. So I think it's fantastic for both sides. However, we have to admit that we're currently working with a client where there are 10,000 people that we're training in India and the USA, and not all 10,000 of those can visit either the USA or India. It's just impractical. So for those team members who are not able to make those personal visits, and they're probably, if we're honest, in the majority, what would your advice be to those people, Nav?
It's very similar to what Vidya is saying. I think the key difference, like I said earlier, if in India we see our colleagues as our friends, then most of your interactions, most of your gesture, the way you communicate is also like friends, right? Friend, when I say friend, it's in the same definition as you have your friends inside work sometimes in the Western world, but mostly outside work, right? So the things that you would talk about, So it starts with really simple things like, if you have a 30-minute call once a week, why not spend 2 minutes at the start of the call just talking about anything but business? Right? How's everyone? How was your weekend? What did you get up to? How's the weather in India? It's really, I know that may sound quite kind of superficial, but it really appeals to those core unconscious values on the Indian team where they think, okay, we're talking about something more than business. So I feel more related to the team. But with many of our clients, we also suggest that you can go the next step. But I always suggest, many times the Western team, when they think about informal chat and getting to know each other, you think, oh, let's talk about weather, let's talk about the sports, or let's talk about how your weekend was. No, I think the colleagues in India, when they talk to each other, talk about very personal things. How's your family? Are you married? Have you got kids? Where did your kids go? People share really personal things that you only share with your friends or very close friends in the West. And I know it's more difficult to think about those, but all I say is experiment with this. Ask really personal things, share personal things with your colleagues in India, and you'll be possibly surprised how receptive they will become and how engaging they become, because over time they start realizing we are becoming friends/colleagues. And I think so any chance you get to have, whether it's virtually, whether that's in person, be more personal, be very, I always challenge the US guys, try to ask something very personal you would never ask in the US, and you'll be possibly surprised how receptive that is in India. If anything, they will love it. They'll probably ask something back. And then there's so many other things that you can start thinking about, mentoring people so they work with each other a lot more, buddy system, or simple things like just, remembering someone's birthday in your team, sending them a greeting on some of the festivals that's going on, or personal appreciation, the positive feedback that Vidya was talking about, recognizing, Nav, you did really well last, and there's a personal gesture for you, or even other things like giving your team a name, right? You're working on a project, why don't give it a name and say, we're all part of this team? I think psychologically, this makes the team, especially on India side, feel you belong to this entity. This is kind of our family. This is kind of where all of us coming from US and India, or Western countries and India, are part of. It's small things like this. And if you start planning this as part of your projects or as part of your kind of team building activities, you will see how that starts impacting the business. The communication becomes better. The engagement becomes better. Feedback will be a lot more open. The risks and issues will be flagged much quicker by you in the team. I feel so much easier to say no to someone in India than to someone I'm trying to build connection with in the earlier. Once you establish a connection with your India team, they can turn around and say, no, Steve, I can't do this. No, Keith, I can't do this. I'm busy. Because you can do that with your friends, right? So all of these things, when you start doing it, although you may not be totally convinced, because this kind of goes against what you've been raised in the West.
Sometimes.
It's going to be uncomfortable. But I think once you see the rewards, then you say, actually, I'm going to keep doing that because it actually helps me with my job. It helps us deliver what we're supposed to deliver. So, yeah, I mean, these are some of the things that we've seen working, people trying in the businesses and really getting some results.
And I think sometimes when you recommend these things to Western clients, there's a skepticism because they seem such small things. And I always say, remember your colleague's birthday and get in touch with them on the birthday. That will have a big impact with people, because they think that they're taking a personal interest in me, and it motivates them. And in the West, I think we can't quite grapple or grasp how big an impact that can be. But we know from the clients we work with that it does really have a positive impact.
Yeah.
These half hours always go so quickly. So I'm going to have to move on to the third topic, which is a topic I'm really interested in. And it kind of extends the issue about the need for personal relationships in India. But this is more to do with how personal relationships and leadership and relationships within the team kind of intermingle in India, and in a way that possibly they don't in the West. And I wondered if you'd just like to talk a bit about that, Vidya.
Sure. So as Nav was saying, colleagues become friends in India, and that applies to managers as well. So managers intentionally take the time to know each team member one-on-one, and obviously, as the instinct goes, people start sharing personal things. So a manager in India is not just looked at as an administrative or like just a pure leadership person. A manager can often be like a friend, philosopher, guide for the people on the team. It's not uncommon for employees in India to share deeply personal issues that they may be facing, whether that's health-wise or financial or going through a divorce or whatever that might be. And the purpose for sharing that is, you're someone I trust, and if you've been noticing that something may not be so on point with my work performance right now, I want you to be aware of what's going on. And the manager obviously then understands, expects, and supports as needed in terms of being able to provide resources or time off or whatever it is that the employee needs. So you're looking out for the well-being as well. Now, that can obviously blur sometimes the line between how much of personal and professional are you really intermingling. But that's really just the way it works in India. And if you're unable to have a conversation like that with your leader, then your leader is looked at as being unapproachable and having not developed a kind of environment that invites open, honest conversations. So it's a given. In my experience, it's absolutely a given in the Indian scenario.
Yeah, and I think that in the West, managers want an open and honest conversation about task and process-oriented things. But that kind of deep relationship thing is, well, that's for your psychiatrist or your parents or your spouse, but not necessarily for your manager. And I know, as we said earlier in the session, that Nav kind of sits with or stands with a foot in both India and the UK. And Nav left India, studied at university in the UK, and then joined a company in the UK. So he had the reverse of this, where he went into an organization as an Indian with Indian expectations, and then was confronted by a more British Western style of leadership. And I just wonder, what your feelings were at that point now.
Now it's, I think the fascinating thing about culture is that you don't realize until you're in it, right, on the other side, because we obviously interpret everything through our own lens, so you're trying to look at those gestures thinking this is what they're trying to say. And in many times, I think when between US and in the UK, between the UK and India, you see those differences, the intent is different. And I think that for me, that's the key difference in the leadership style, where yes, in the UK is also quite soft leadership. People will give you a lot of space to do your own task. It's a lot more egalitarian. But what you miss as an Indian in the UK is that personal touch, is that kind of over time where there's a parental leadership style that you're craving, thinking someone I can talk to, someone can guide me through life, I can ask personal things. I think there's a hesitation in the UK to say, I think that's too personal. I should not really get involved in your personal life. As I think as a UK manager, you would expect that your team would expect not to.
Mm-hmm.
At least the British team would expect you not to. So I think you always feel that.
You might be accused of overstepping the mark in the UK if you did.
Exactly. You think it's your personal life. I have to give you your personal space, And I think many times the Indian teams kind of look at that is that you're not interested in building the team. You're not interested in building that camaraderie, the really closeness I expect as a default in the team, where people hang out with each other afterwards. People talk to each other. There's WhatsApp group at work where we all share our information. People ask each other for advice on kids and all sort of things, and people are at each other's weddings and birthday parties and all of these things, which just does not happen in the UK, And the company you were talking about, I won't name the company, but I was there for 10 years, right? Met many people. We worked on many of the projects for a very, very long time. I think I've only got 2 friends from that company who are still in touch with me. And the reason for that is with one of them, I play golf, and the other one I do cycling with, right? So I think that is the extent. Yeah, you can make friends in the UK, but it's not a default, right? You have to have things which you find in common outside work. So yeah, so I think the management style kind of is in the same way. It's more transactional. It feels more transactional. It's really business first. You can deliver your tasks. I think in the start you feel in the UK that it's very friendly, right? Because people are very informal from very first day. So you have that perception in the UK, it's going to be very easy with my team, with my manager, it's so friendly. I don't have to build that relationship, because remember, on the journey, you already feel you're here with the UK. But once you get to there, you realize there's no further. And I think that this is where you start feeling potentially lonely, or I think many Indian teams, when they're coming to the UK, working with the UK management, they feel alienated that no one is coming talking to me. And all the British team is doing is respecting your personal space. Yeah. Right. Good intentions from both sides, but I think wrong results.
And I've heard lots of stories from clients where they've said that we brought a key employee from India over to work in the UK for 3 months to learn whatever. And then when they went back, they left the business. And you say to them, well, what did you do with them when you came to the UK? What do you mean, what do we do with them? Socially, what do you do with them? Well, we didn't do anything with them. They want their own space. And so that person who came over from India was felt completely unwanted, unloved, and ignored while they were there, and felt they had no future with the business.
And this is, by the way, this is one of the biggest mistakes the managers from the West make when they go to India to meet their team. What they were saying, they say, we've done all the business in the evening. I just want space for myself. I'm going to go back to my hotel room and not talk. No, the most important part is outside the work in the evening. Go take your team out for meal or whatever. Yes, it would feel unprofessional maybe from a perspective of the West, but it is the most important thing. Spend time with your team outside work, and that really builds and really fast forwards that connect, the trust that you need to build. But yeah, I think it's easier said than done, but it's crucial.
Yeah, So unfortunately our time is up, but we always feel that this 30 minutes goes very quickly, and we could obviously go into all of these topics in much more detail. And one of the things that very often when all of us are running client training sessions on India, people very often say to us, have you written a book? And we always have had to say, well, no, we haven't written a book. And people say, well, you should write a book. And so we've written a book. And the next episode that we're going to do, we're going to talk about the book which we've written, which is called Working with Teams in India, and is an exploration, slightly more depth, of many of the issues that we talk about in these LinkedIn Lives. And what we'll do in the next one is just talk a little bit about what we put into the book, why we chose those topics in the book, how we think that readers and clients can benefit from some of the learnings from the book. So we'll look forward to that one, which will be around this time next month. So thank you very much for tuning in. Anybody who watches it on YouTube or later on LinkedIn, thanks very much for your time. If you've got, as always, if you've got any specific topics you'd like us to cover, please get in touch and let us know. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks Nav, thanks Vidya.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye for now.
Bye.